Hi, Misha here, and in this video, going to talk about a very lesser known U.S. naval aircraft, but in a lot of ways, it was kind of very important. This is the Brewster F2A Buffalo. What a name. And here I've got an F2A1 circa 1939 U.S. Navy. This is an Oxford model, so pretty basic. And here I have a B239E, which is an export variant made for the Finnish Air Force, the FAF. And this is actually, in a way, a lot more important, historically speaking. Also, the Oxford models are pretty basic. 1/72 scale diecast. Doesn't have moving parts. The propeller doesn't spin. It is a very metal body, though. But gear are just up, and no pilot. But this one is from Atlas, and it's one of their newer ones. It actually does have a spinning propeller. It does come with gear up or down, and it does have a basic pilot figure in the cockpit. A little more detail. That kind of thing. And what's funny is these cost the same as the older ones, so it's kind of a good deal. They're kind of built on the old IXO tooling as far as I can tell. But anyway, I digress. The Brewster Buffalo. Well, this really dates back to 1935 when the U.S. Navy was looking to replace its F-3F biplane with a new, more modern carrier-based fighter. This led to trials, and it really came down to a design from Grumman, the XF4F-1 Wildcat, and the XF2A-1 from Brewster. Now, the Wildcat at the time isn't the Wildcat you know. It was a biplane and very different. To that end, the Brewster design pretty handily defeated it in trials in 1937, 1938, and was selected. It was a very modern plane for its day. It was an all-metal with flush rivet skin. It was a monoplane. It had hydraulically retracted landing gear, at least in the front. It did have a tail gear that still stuck out. And actually, it was very fast. The initial prototype got up to nearly 280 miles per hour. But after some wind tunnel testing in 1938, they found some points of drag and whatnot. They went back and streamlined it, and they were able to get it over 300 miles per hour, which was pretty darn fast for that time. This also is really what started wind tunnel testing as an industry standard. Before that, it wasn't a common thing for airplane designs, but afterwards, it was. So to that end, the U.S. Navy ordered 54 of them, and production started off as the F2A-1 Buffalo. And that's pretty much what this is here, a -1. It is only about 27 foot long in the fuselage. has a wingspan of 35 feet. It's a very interesting body. It's very squat, very round, very thick. Initially, this only had 2 machine guns. It had a 50 caliber with 200 rounds of ammo and a 30 caliber with 600 rounds of ammo. What it did not have was a self-sealing fuel tank or additional armor for the pilot. So it was fast. It proved to be very maneuverable, had a very good turn rate, and it also had a very good climb rate. And these started to be delivered to the U.S. Navy in late spring of '39, and the first 10 out of the initial order were stationed on the USS Saratoga in December of that year. It took a while to get these out because Brewster had had some production delays, difficulties. They even had some management issues. It was kind of a mess, frankly. During that time, the Navy wanted a few changes. For example, they wanted 2 more machine guns added. They also wanted to replace the 30 caliber with another 50. This would ultimately result in the F2A-2, which had additional machine guns. It also had a more powerful engine. Its top speed was pushed to over 320 miles per hour. However, the added weight did affect a bit of maneuverability, and it did slow its climb rate a bit. These were ordered, but really that's about it. These didn't have a whole lot of time in American service. Already by 1940, this was starting to look kind of outdated. And more importantly, they realized they couldn't upgrade the engine any further. It really needed a more powerful engine because they wanted to start adding more gear to it. For example, self-sealing fuel tanks, which ultimately resulted in January of 1941 with the F2A-3, which had self-sealing fuel tanks, additional ammunition for the 4 machine guns. It had armor for the cockpit. It had a new radio and other things. But since the engine couldn't be upgraded, this weight cost it a lot. The top speed dropped back down quite significantly, but more importantly, the maneuverability, the turn rate was severely hampered. About 110 of these were ordered. But even now, the Navy wasn't, even before World War II, the Navy wasn't super excited with them. But once war began, the shortcomings of the F2 Buffalo were very quickly apparent. The U.S., as well as the Netherlands Air Force and the British RAF, did fly these against the Japanese after Pearl Harbor and quickly got their asses handed to them, essentially. The plane just could not keep up with the A6M0. And at the same time, the newer F4F-3 and eventual F4F-4 Wildcats were just better than the F2A-2 or F2A-3 in every single way imaginable. They were faster, they had more armament, they were more durable. Essentially, the plane was just obsolescent. Nevertheless, these continued on in U.S. Navy service, and many were given to the Marines as kind of a stopgap, and so they did see use during the first half of 1942. They did have some victories against Japanese bombers and other aircraft, but when it came time to fighters like the Zero, no, they really didn't have a whole lot of luck. Most of them were ended up shot down. And really the last gasp for the Buffalo in American service was the Battle of Midway. After it, both the Navy and the Marines retired them out of any kind of like frontline service. They were sent stateside for training. But then by 1943, already the next year, newer aircraft like the F4U and the F6F Wildcat were even making the Hellcat, making the F4F Wildcat look obsolete, meaning the Brewster was a couple of generations behind. Production had actually ended in 1941 at any rate. They would build about 509 of these according. So not a huge production number. But then again, they were only in production for about 3 years. But even though its career in the U.S. military was nothing at all, in Finland, the story was very different. In the spring of 1939, the Finnish government approached the U.S. White House, asking for modern fighters. They needed them yesterday, essentially, so anything in production they were willing to accept. In October of that year, the U.S. government approved a plan of those 54 F2A-1s ordered by the U.S. Navy. Only 11 had been delivered. The remaining balance of 43 to 44, depending on the source you read, were sent to Finland instead, which Finland signed for in December of that year. And its first test flight of a Buffalo occurred in February of 1940, which, by the way, they didn't call the Buffalo. They actually just called it the Brewster, or the Flying Beer Can. So it missed the Winter War, but it was operational and ready to go by the continuation war and first saw combat in June of 1941. And between that time and June of 1944, the Finnish Air Force would fly these against the Soviet Air Force very successfully. At first, they weren't real keen on the plane, but quickly they learned to appreciate its attributes. They also made some changes. They added some armor to the cockpit. They added a new gun sight. They made sure theirs had at least 4 machine guns. After all their changes, the max speed was only about 300 miles per hour again. This did have the uprated engine, of much like the F2A-2, so that helped a lot. But mostly it was just because they could. They did the best. They learned the plane's strengths and limitations, and they worked around it. And of course, at the time, the Soviets were distracted by the Germans, so what was sent to Finland wasn't exactly their crack troops. So this did really well against early Russian planes like the I-16 and first generation Yak. In fact, 36 Finnish pilots were made aces in Brewsters in Finland. And the highest scoring of those had 39 kills in a Brewster. Planes themselves, the serial plane that had the most kills, had 42.5 victories. It shot down with a few different pilots at the helm, which could quite possibly be a record. Not many planes from World War II shot down over 40 enemies. Similarly, even though only 509 Buffaloes were made, 40 aces were made in them. Obviously, the majority were from Finland, but a few were racked up from other sources, like the Dutch Air Force. So, nearly 1/10 of the planes made ended up making aces, which is an amazing figure for World War II. Anyway, the Finnish Air Force kind of had to start replacing these by 1943 because they were running out of spare parts. They just couldn't keep them flying, even though they did find that they were pretty easy to maintain, frankly. Still yet, they were running out of parts. Brewster was no longer making them. The USA war, so on and so forth. So they started to phase them out. Like I said, the last really flight where it had any use against the Soviet Union was in December of 44. They started replacing these with German Bf-109G models. And then, of course, there was the Treaty of the Continuation War. And then you had the Lapland War. And Finland would fly some Brewsters against their former allies, the Germans. And a Brewster would have a victory against a German plane in October of 1944. And this would be the last time that one of these had success in World War II and pretty much throughout history. After the Second World War, of course, America had long retired their Brewsters and scrapped what few they had left. Finland would actually keep 5 flying until 1948, when they took their final flight on September 14th of that year. So this really took to the air for just about exactly a decade. And yeah, it's kind of an interesting plane, mostly because it was pretty advanced for its day for the U.S. Navy, but really shows how quickly things were made obsolete during the 1930s and early 1940s. Its really lack of armor and lack of armament shows that it just wasn't prepared for the new type of warfare that came about. But it wasn't a completely bad plane, but it just wasn't what it was. As far as these models, what's is interesting, like I said, this is just solid metal. It's in Oxford. They're about $20. Good representative pieces, nothing special. I really like these new Atlas and their new series. They're about the same, $24. But like I said, they come with gear up or down. Some of them come with ordnance. They come with a little stand. The canopy doesn't open, but there is a basic pilot inside. And they do some interesting ones, and they do have a customized stand. I think these are pretty good little value in the diecast world. But anyway, I just thought I'd talk about this since this isn't a well-known aircraft. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. And if you could, like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.